Time coming. Today's been a very frustrating Zoom day for me.
It's working fine. We
So I'm
can
drinking
see it.
wine. Nice.
I am very sleepy.
It's like 3 a.m. your time, isn't it? What is it?
It's 9:30, but I've
Yeah.
been up for a while today. You have met me, Jenny. You know that I'm all manic energy all the time. It's exhausting. It's an exhausting pace to set for yourself.
Which is wonderful. That's
Yeah, this is
wonderful.
great. I'm fine, but it is. I kept looking at Natalie, going like, "What time is it? Where? Oh, it's a virtual background. Oh, it's a virtual. That's the thing. Got it."
Oh, that's a new, completely new phenomenon, right? Like to be fooled as to what time zone you're in or what time zone your compatriots are in because
Yeah.
of the Zoom background.
Well, I mean, because you and I, we both taught in China once upon a time in our lives, and I felt very like equipped for this bit of the Zoom thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because I used to log on at 2 in the morning because that's when I could talk to people. I
Yeah.
am a little jealous. I keep seeing videos of like students getting really creative with the backgrounds. Did you know that you can create your own custom backgrounds? Of course you do. Did you know that you can make them animated? That you can like run a video in the background constantly?
That
Yeah.
sounds like a horrendous distraction. Why would anyone want to do that?
Well, the one that I saw online that made me think like, what am I doing wrong? Like, how do I teach my students so that they like feel free and comfortable enough to have themselves dragging their own body across the screen back and forth over and over and over again during a class session? Because that's what I want. That's what I want. I want to look and go like, why does that person appear to be wanting to bury their own body somewhere? Like that's the type of distraction I welcome in my class. I'm currently teaching evil in literature, and because Chicago lets me call classes evil incarnate, and I'm like, that's what I'm gonna do. So
can you describe a little bit what evil in literature entails? Like, what's your reading list like? Like,
so
I have so many questions.
I just taught a class. I really like this one. It's unfortunately they're very tired, but I taught in one class Shirley Jackson, H.P. Lovecraft, and Clarice Lispector. Shirley Jackson's Possibility of Evil, Dagon, H.P. Lovecraft, and then Where Were You at Night by Clarice Lispector, where there is a character intermittently called she, he, and he, she, that is basically a Cenobite from what is it called in English? Hellraiser, from Hellraiser, essentially. This is great. We have a lot of fun. And
what is Hellraiser not in English?
I think it's close to Beanhead, probably. We have a common friend named Sarah Vereen, and what I do very, very late at night is I send her voice memos titled $1 Million Idea number 72. I think I'm in like 13, but realistically. But the last one was a board game based on what movies are called in Spanish, and you have to guess them in English. I haven't worked out the kinks, but I tell you the magnificent ones, and you have to arrive at the A team, and I have to tell you the rebel she-nun, and you have to arrive at Sound of Music. I haven't worked out the kinks, but it is my retirement plan.
That's a really lovely way to segue into this reading tonight. Which is so awesome. Thank you so much, Lina, for joining us. I'm going to say some words about you, and then I'm going to turn the reins back over to you. And we may or may not have other people hopping on this call, but before I do anything else, Lina, I would really love it if you would pronounce your full name for all of us. And then I'll just call you Lina from after that.
That's fine. My name is Lina Maria Ferreira Cabeza Vanegas.
Thank you, Lina. So Lina is an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Chicago. Her nonfiction, poetry, translation, and fiction have been published all over the place, and her pursuits have taken her from Colombia to Iowa to China to Chicago, at least, and I guarantee there are more places in there. She's won all kinds of prizes, of course, also. Her official academic genres are nonfiction and literary translation, but her work manages to get way weirder than all that. So I offer up for an example this description of what's going on in her essay collection, Don't Come Back. Don't Come Back intermixes translations of Spanish adages and adaptations of major Colombian myths with personal essays about growing up amidst violence, magic, and an unyielding Andean sun. Home is place and time and people and language and history, and none of these are ever set in stone. It is an attempt to reconcile the irreconcilable and translate the untranslatable. In an interview, Lina described writing that book like this. I knew a book that jumped genres, timelines, and perspectives while utilizing diagrams, images, and untranslatable aphorisms was the most impractical book I could write. But every time I sat down to write either of the two very practical and accessible books I'd planned from start to finish, I simply couldn't write them. It was like chewing on cardboard and pretending it was a feast for the sake of my host, except I was playing both parts and quickly lost the will to pretend I was pretending. I love that a lot. Lina has at one point owned our carnivorous plant named Belial, called so after a demon of lies and guilt. She was a founding member of an academic pursuit known as tween studies, which is exactly what it sounds like, and involves watching movies like The Craft, 13 Going on 30, and Ella Enchanted. Lina once sent me an Eight of Swords tarot card in the mail, which was extremely unsettling and extremely cool. She's interested in writing that acknowledges, this is a quote, writing that acknowledges that it takes imagination to understand reality, and that reality itself is a feat of imagination and conviction, which is so cool. I basically can't even see straight. Thank you for joining us tonight, Lina. And please take it away.
Thank you for having me, Jenny. And Eastern Washington University. I already mentioned that my friendship with Jenny began by me cat sitting for her, an asthmatic cat. And there were, I kid you not, 2 single-space pages of instructions to take care of this cat.
He had a lot of needs, like a lot of needs.
Very needy cat.
At the time that you knew him, I feel like there was
just one page was what happens if Yaoi, what happens if Yaoi has an asthma attack. I don't know what I was supposed to be doing, but the one time that I think may have happened, I just read from Tyra's book to him, and it calmed him. So that's my advice to any of you who have asthmatic cats. Okay, so it's 9:38 p.m. in Chicago Central Time. I had a few things planned, but I'm a big believer in reading unfinished work. So this hasn't been published anywhere. I don't know what it will become, or if it will become, but it's called Sacred Heart, and it's I'm probably not going to be able to read from all of it because I write lengthily. But here are all your content warnings. I write about war, cruelty, violence, and how to cope with all these things. And there's a cat that is very enthusiastically trying to convince me that it's dinner time. So if that happens, just ignore it. That's the only language he understands. Again, thank you so much for everybody having me, for Essayists in Washington University, for Greg and Jenny for inviting me, and for having grad students again, because I mostly deal with undergrads whom I love, adore them, but I sometimes miss MFA students. So this is Sacred Heart. I'm going to read until the spirit tells me to stop, and then we can have a little bit of a Q&A. Does that work? Is that fair? Okay, excellent. I was 15 in the year 2000, turn of the millennium, turn of tables and tides. Every morning, there were reports on the radio, and every night, the news showed footage of the peace talks between the Colombian government and the FARC forces, folding tables and plastic chairs in a room with no walls. And I don't think anyone really thought anything would come of it. Still, we watched. The future of our country on the screen and on a precipice. History about to reassert itself or to buckle under the demands of men in white linen shirts and unofficial fatigues, sweating in unison under the uncompromising heat of San Vicente del Caguan. At 9 p.m., the camera settled on an empty chair and stern faces to capture the moment, at the exact moment when we would all be remade by paper and pen, what we were and had been known for, had been seen as. For my whole life and all of my parents' adult life too, 2 generations worth and so many lost lives between for that moment. We watched and we listened. Microphones, dress shoes, and rifles. What will happen next? They said on the television. Well, we'll have to see. On Sunday night, May 14th, what will happen next? We'll have to see. So I washed my shoelaces in the bathroom sink for school uniform inspection the next day. While 3 hours north of Bogota, a man carefully placed a bomb inside a PVC pipe frame like a hermit crab into its shell. We don't know much about this man and this night, except a few uninflected facts. That around 4 in the morning, along with at least 2 others, he walked in through the front door of the home of Ana Elvia Cortés Gil, one which she shared with her husband Salomon Pachon. 2, that they wore ski masks and military fatigues, and 3, that they wanted money. There is conflict about nearly every other detail. Sometimes the men arrive at 3 in the morning, sometimes at 4. Sometimes there are 3 of them, and sometimes more. Always, though, it ends with a single woman with a single bomb strapped around her neck. Is there a knock at the door? Is there a whistle? A slender frame climbing in through the open window of a small brick home? A hand sliding back the curtains and then sliding back the lock so the rest could slither into the house like mustard fog and black mist, so they could place their hands down on sleeping bodies, like orderlies, like exorcists, like rubber-gloved men on slabs of live wire eels. Was the bomb zipped into an old-school backpack? A hitman's duffel bag, wrapped in newspaper and bubble wrap, tied with old shoelaces and string, placed gently into a plastic grocery bag, and held carefully in both arms like a sleeping baby, like an egg on a spoon, like a bowl of water filled to the brim, like a ticking time bomb? Do the men accidentally knock over the statue of Jesus on the mantle on their way in? Do they intentionally knock it over on their way out? Perhaps they kick down a wooden panel door. Perhaps it goes flying out in a splintering splendor of wood chips and loose hinges. That feels true, right? Cinematic. The soul of a boot, the crack of a door, and the sound of men yelling malparidos y reputas, ahora sí que sí. Wake up, motherfuckers, now you'll see what's what. At school, we started running bomb drills after a rumor that Pablo Escobar was planning to bomb a school in Bogota. On November 27, 1989, he had taken down a plane from a commercial airline and had 106 people with it. Avianca flight number 203 from Bogota to Palmira, which a man who would later become president was scheduled to board, but who was miraculously spared by a last-minute cancellation. Thank Jesus, he said. That's my guardian angel. Divine intervention, that's what that is. At 7:10, the Avianca flight lifts off. At 7:11, the wheels have retracted and ears begin to pop. At 7:12, nervous passengers are still gripping the crosses around their necks and whispering prayers. At 7:13, they have likely reached 6,000 feet and the earth below is a porthole postcard. At 7:14, it begins to feel normal again. It is almost over. We can become accustomed to anything at all, even this. Air and speed and planes like pot-bellied birds in a windstorm. At 7:16, it is over. A roaring fire at 10,000 feet, an explosion like a halo of sharp teeth, and a spinning crown of metal thorns. Confusion, noise, and gravity. What was left of the flight and its passengers landed in Soacha, less than a 2-hour drive from where I spent most of my childhood. Just like a trash heap, a woman who saw it firsthand told me years later. Pale ash, white paint, low red flames and charred black bodies, both unmistakable and barely discernible all at once, an open grave and a scrapyard. Just like that, she said to me once, un basurero, but with people in it. So at school, we ran the drills on a rumor alone because in the 90s, everything seemed possible. Same way the darkness makes the horizon infinite, and a hand in the fire can stretch minutes into miles of time, wax candle fingerlight, and time burned down to wick and bone. It is unclear now if school bombings were ever on the table or on anyone's mind, but then that is the point of terrorism. Oh, the places you will bomb. I remember teachers arranging us into groups down the main building's hallway. They paired and unpaired us, told us to stand up straight, to sit in circles, to cross our legs, and then to kneel, to keep our eyes wide open, to keep them shut, and to pray, Ángel de mi guarda, mi dulce compañía, to never ever run until we were told to, oh, my guardian angel, my sweet company, and then to run and never ever look back. So we watched them, wave their arms like flight attendants, raise their voices, and pace up and down that hallway as if trying to correct the course of a river with nothing but a paper cup. But we traded snacks and marbles and secrets we'd borrowed from older kids and whispering parents because though no one said it aloud, we weren't scared. We were too odd and too small to matter, and our insignificance kept us safe. The most likely scenario is the most likely scenario is that the men neither slid in nor slithered out. Men who dream up bombs you can strap around women's necks are not creatures of nuance or subtlety. Instead, they kept it simple. They cut the lights, they poisoned the dogs. 4 explosive-filled sections of PVC pipe that fit around Doña Elvia's neck. Strap it on, tape it up, leave pre-recorded instructions. In an article in El Tiempo, a journalist describes the voice on the tape as nasally and cavernous, but with excellent diction. Pay close attention, it said. Mr. Pachon, Mrs. Cortez, this collar is a bomb, and you have 10 hours. Doña Elvia lived in a home called Hope, in an area known as Sanctuary, on a street named Palestine, La Esperanza, el Santuario de la Palestina. White walls, clay tiles, red flowers out front. This was a home where she raised her sons and planted her corn, where she raised her chickens and fed her dogs, where she fell asleep to the sound of her husband's breathing or the croaking sound of Andean nights, where she woke well before the blistering sunrise bled through the white gauze mist, so she could tend to the day-to-day of a country road farm. A wool sweater, a brown jacket, her breathing rising like steam as she rubbed her hands together and began to milk her cows. Maybe she hummed to herself. Maybe she fiddled with the radio antenna until she got something on the radio. Some soccer scores, rewards for information, Lucho Herrera, bicycle races in the 90s, and Juan Pablo Montoya's Formula One in the 2000s. Vamos, muchachos, vamos, viva Colombia. Like a quiet that draws in what is left of the night like fistfuls of black dust and loose feathers before a white wind dawn scatters them across the cold savannah morning. Time and night and silence as she filled bucket after bucket, container after container, skin to skin, plastic to metal. No automation beyond her wrist and her wristwatch. I lived in a small town when I was 5, not far from roads like those in La Palestina. A milkman came to our door with an aluminum cylinder sloshing about with thick white liquid that he measured out with the dented lid. And I remember watching his hand, his whole body mechanically molded around the motion of pouring milk from the container into the lid, from the lid into the plastic jug my mother held out with both hands, all the way to the brim, never a spill, never a splash, one into the other, into the other, into the other. Then the lid folded back into the rim, like his hand folded back into the handle and his back into the fog. So this is how I picture her too. Milk, foam, calloused hands, strong coffee, and persistent miss while she pours in perfectly measured motions, like flawless memory and practiced recitation. Some reports about this evening are vaguer than others. Spanish lends itself to fogginess and ambiguity. Se rompió, se quemó, se mató, se voló, se escapó, se cayó, se suicidó. reflexive, blameless verbs with tacit free radical pronouns. It felt, it flew, it fell, it fled, it burned itself down, it blew itself up, it cut itself to pieces. War was started, peace is being negotiated, the call was made. Some reports point to a neighbor making the call. Others, though, unequivocally state that it was Salomon, Doña Elvia's husband, clutching the receiver. Please, I imagine him saying, send someone, please. But then, regardless of who made the call, the person on the other end would have to have asked, what has happened? So, what does he say? What does anyone say, and how do they say it? How does one begin to explain PVC made into an IED made to fit around a woman's neck? There were these men this morning, 3, maybe 4 of them at 3, maybe 4 a.m. Do you see? They wore ski masks and fatigues, but not the official kind. You know who. Yes, like that. They had a backpack or a grocery bag or a rain-soaked cardboard box. Then they pulled this thing out of it and strapped it around a woman's neck, my neighbor's neck, my wife's neck, around my neck. How does one explain the foresight to record a tape? The time it must have taken them to install the bomb around Doña Elvia's neck that very morning, how still she must have had to sit, how still she would have still had to be sitting when the call was made, and in that chair, in her home, her farm, her country, waiting. Where does one start? Where does one stop? Please, just hurry. They said they had a remote control. They said not to call you. They said 10 hours. Does Salomon look over his shoulder then, mid-call, back to check that it is not a terrible dream, a dark mirage in the morning mist? Does he give up at some point and simply hold up the receiver to the tape recorder and press play? By 5:20 a.m., the police were on their way, and there were 9 hours left. I think maybe I will stop there. It goes on for a number of hours, but I think maybe we can have a conversation about it. Or not. We can also just stare at each other silently.
I didn't know if you were going to speak, Luke, but I had a question for you, Lina. I was taken in the essay you just read by the sort of inquisitive, speculative nature of the piece, how it sort of seemed to move freely through time and space. Aside from that countdown that I thought this was very effective. But there's this speculative nature where you were asking, was this person doing this at this time? Was this thing this way in this moment? And I found that to be really powerful. So I'm just curious about, maybe what led you to structure that piece in that way, and what some of your thought process was behind that.
So what was my thought process behind choosing the countdown timer aspect? Or
yeah, that, and there's all these there's like this inquisitive nature to the piece. This very curious nature of the piece, where there seemed to be this speculation about like what really happened in that moment, what was really going on. Sort of investigative is maybe a better word. And I found that also to be a powerful choice. So either one of those, if I would be very privileged to hear you speak about.
Thank you. That's a very insightful question. I'm grateful that you asked it. So it's a complicated thing. Writing about this sort of things. I think I'm a relatively jocular, lighthearted person. But the only things I sit down to write about are these things. I imagine because they are hard to talk about. This is the thing that I write. This is objectively one of the most awful things I, know about, and not quite firsthand, but not quite secondhand either. And it wasn't that far. And these places were very, very close. They were happening all the time. There isn't anyone who was alive during this period that doesn't have and I didn't get off at that stop, and that's why I'm alive, because the car bomb went off like minutes later. Like everyone has a story like that. But this particular event has been instrumental in a lot of narratives. It was used by those who were opposed to the peace talks, like this, those who can put bombs around women's necks do not get to talk of peace. And the reality is that it is still unsure. It is still unclear if the FARC had anything to do with this particular act of terrorism, but it also doesn't matter. That's the thing, right? Like it doesn't matter. The ideology doesn't matter. The result is kind of the same. So I write a lot about this, and I struggle with this, with the fact that I am writing about something that is it's someone's life, right? So I write her name a lot. I write her name throughout all the pages, and I've never read this piece, or I've never even tried to read this piece and not felt sort of the weight, a terrible weight of having felt the freedom to write about someone else's story. It's the worst thing that you can write about. So you have this constant debate within yourself where you're like, I want to write so that people read this, and I want to write so that people don't want to read this. That's the debate. I want to write something horrifically because it is horrific, and I don't want you to enjoy it. I don't want anybody to sit there going like, I'm just going to reread that thing because it's just so. Fortunately, my mother says my book is unreadable, so I've succeeded there. But on the other hand, it is a story that deserves to be told in a way that people who don't care about the specific subject will read it. This is very easy to sensationalize, right? Like I grew up like watching gringo movies on daytime television, poorly dubbed, and the whole sort of Rambo, or like be flown in, be dropped in, Captain America, I will sort of fix it, was always in the background. And even as a child, I had an allergy to it. These are complicated things, and you don't get to jump in and then jump out and everything's going to be fine. So when I started writing this, I was very aware of the way that it would be written as an action movie. So you have the countdown, right? It's a ticking bomb. It's a Chekhov's gun. It's very easy. You have the arc, so I'm going to make you a participant in this horrible thing, and I'm going to feel horrible with it too. And you're going to have to ask yourself, like, do you want it to get there? Like, do you want the countdown to arrive as you keep reading? And I don't. The one thing that I decided was important was to never write the explosion. So that's not the point. Her name is very rarely written. Doña Elvia Cortés Gil, that was her full name, but she's always known as the bomb collar woman. So I took away the explosion because that wasn't point of the story, but I also wanted to write a story, to write an essay that made you narratively want that climax to be that. And then for you to have to ask yourself, like I ask myself, like when I write about these things, is there something to feel guilty about? Is there something that we may make ourselves complicit? And is that complicit nature something necessary? To understand war, do we have to understand the bomb and the mechanism, and understand what it does to a body? So the countdown wasn't intuitive, wasn't easy. It was something that I added, and I wanted to have it was largely inspired by the work of Michael Haneke, who makes the most horrifying horror movies, because they are horror movies that make you feel the guilt of the horror of horror, rather than sort of the glossy, how horrific can we get, moral tale to be. So that's the reason I'm obsessed with structure. I don't believe that if you're doing it right, I don't think there's a separation between content and structure, content and form. There is, Paradise Lost needed to be free verse because it is a story of rebellion, and it's a story about breaking the norms, in the same way that the work of Desiree Matherly, who's a genius. I don't know what you should have her over. She's better writer asleep than I am awake on my best day. She wrote, her last book is called Echo's Fugue, and it's all these incredibly experimental essays, and every form, she writes Final Comprehensive roughly, which is an essay exploring about what's worth knowing. And it's written in the form of a comprehensive exam. And then she wrote it when she should have been studying for her comps. But it's that moment where you start wondering, like, you've dedicated yourself to knowing all these facts about these books. What of all this knowledge is worthwhile? What do you get to keep? So as you read this as exam and you kind of want to respond to it, you can't. There's not enough space. These are not questions that can be answered, by any multiple choice. So I tried to emulate that a bit. I wanted the form to feel urgent, but to feel the correct urgency. And it isn't the urgency of an explosion, it's the urgency of life and of living it in between those cracks. I hope I answered your question somewhere in there.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was incredible.
Thank you, Josh. Are there other questions, other comments, anything else?
Can you write the name of that person in the book you just mentioned?
Desiree Matherly.
You read it in the chat then, Ellen?
Yes.
There we go. See, I would have spelled it differently.
Echo's Fugue.
Cool. Thank you.
She's fantastic and a wonderful person to boot. Should I get my partner's cat? I know that there was some requests earlier to see him.
We can have a cat show and tell.
Yeah. If everyone is tired, you don't have to. I had another thing that I could read very quickly, but if there are questions, I know that maybe everybody is tired and that's okay. But if you'd rather me read, we can do that too.
I would so love to hear more.
Would you like to hear more of this piece or a different piece?
Your choice.
Your choice.
Okay, I will. I don't generally read this piece, but this is the only piece I've ever written in one go. So one of the essays that I had to work on the longest is called the Peach Orchard, which is my sort of ode in a way to the cherry orchard to Chekhov's. And I structured it in a similar way, and I read it and reread it, and it took me 4 years to write. And I don't think it was published anywhere until the book. And then this piece, I sat down and I wrote it in half an hour, and don't know if I edited anything substantially apart from like a few things, and it got published as it was. But it's also about the death of my aunt, so I don't recommend this method. I wrote it, I think maybe a couple of weeks after she died. And it's called Pain Pays the Income of Each Precious Thing. I stole the title from Shakespeare, from The Rape of Lucrezia. And that's my advice to anybody who has a hard time finding titles. Just steal them. If it's good enough for Pale Fire and Sound of Fury, it's good enough for you. I've never come up with a title really worthwhile that I haven't stolen outright. Like this. They dropped this girl off at school after a visit to the dentist. Midway through the day, when all we do is throw stones at the rain, her gums are numb, so incredibly numb. She opens her mouth wide and digs her fingernails into them, swearing all the while that she does not feel a thing. Or, like this. I hold the cat that has never liked to be held against my shoulder while you try to clip the claws. I press it down against my body like a baby full of helium and needles. It tried to wriggle out of my grasp. It digs its claws deep into my shoulder and right above my ribs, climbing shoes on a mountainside, spigots on a maple tree, little itchy dots and pinpricks of red sap. Or better yet, Jesus, who looks after the garden behind our elementary school classroom in Cali, Colombia. A round man in a blue overall jumpsuit, chest hair caught in his zipper, machete hanging from an unused belt loop. We Lexas call him Chuchito, would surround and harass him like so many featherless, wide-mouthed birds in a nest. A ring, of spinning and chanting and begging and pleading, Chuchito, tiene caña, until he take the machete from his hip like a holy staff, like a brass serpent or a tiger's tail. Porfis, Chucho, porfis, please, 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 please. And hurriedly he cuts of cane sugar down for us, swift and sweet, soft sugar-soaked pulp, still sheathed in splintered stalk. Grant us, Jesus, our daily cane. One swing to pluck, another to split, and we ran swinging green stalks like swords above our heads. Like this girl back in school after a visit to the dentist, telling us her gums were numb, so incredibly numb. She opened her mouth wide and dug her fingernails into them. See? Nothing. But it's hard to believe, and we tell her she's faking. We know that everything that hurts always hurts and hurts right away, and sometimes for a long time after. So she reaches for a pencil. I'm not lying. She drools, she protests. She pecks a tiny path of graphite holes across her gum line with the pencil, colorblind stars in a pink sky. I cannot feel it, not at all. But we shake our heads and we say no, and no, faker. Because maybe we don't believe, or maybe we want to see what else she cannot feel. So she reaches for a stapler. Like this. My mother sitting in a cemetery coffee shop. Atop the metal table, a wooden box full of her older sister's ashes. She lifts the lid and presses down on the ash-filled plastic bag. She's surprised how little is left, how thorough the ovens, the fire. 10 years of cancer, hospitals, referrals, intubation, ambulances, electric beeps, and iodine hospital hallways. 10 years awake and asleep, waiting rooms and induced comas. 1,000 needle mosquitoes and a handful of veins. 100 blood tubes clinking, a lifetime sedated and punctured. And it all fits in a box, little wooden box. So she presses down and feels something sharp in the ashes. Do you want to feel? She asks me. Because not everything is burnt all the way through, she says. Fingertips down on sharp bits of charred bone. Like Chuchito, quietly going back into his garden, machete swinging from his hip while we chewed through math class until the edges of the stalk made our gums bleed and we drooled sweet blood water on grid paper arithmetic. Like it won't hurt when the sugar dries up, when she doesn't wake up. Unfelt sores and private scars, like my mother holding her older sister one last time while the cemetery men kick stones at the road, a final moment before placing her ashes in the ossuary beside her father and grandfather. Her hands are on the box, her eyes are on the lid, and her voice cracks, splinters. It is pierced and piercing. No one, she says, can call you names now, cheeky. Like a girl dropped off after a visit to the dentist, opening her mouth so wide we can hear the sides crack as we stick our heads in like lion tamers, a single file line of staples above the gum line while the Novocaine wears off. I don't know if you thought this was going to be anything but purely depressing. But if that was the case, I sincerely apologize. I've never written a happy thing in my life. But I can read something from fiction if you want me to read more, if there are any questions or anything that you'd like to say. My range is wide and varied. I like lyrical, but I'm currently pretty in love with narrative. Yes, Julie?
Lina, yeah, earlier today in the workshop, you said something roughly like this: all good writing has a mystery, always something to be discovered, what can get resolved, and the mystery that pulls us along. And it seems like both the pieces that you've read for us tonight are definitely driven by where are we going, what's the mystery. And it seems like you feel like they're all heavy or morbid or sad, but they don't have to be. There's a lot of, there's what I heard, I guess would like to hear you more say more about it, but I heard that even in the pain or the intensity of what you were writing, there was a real poetic beauty.
Mm.
And
Well, I don't, that was not a question, but I'll take it. I mean, I think I don't know how bad a habit it is, or if it is just a habit, but we undercut ourselves. I think particularly if you are a woman or a non-binary person or female presenting or of any particularly oppressed or unrepresented minority group, um, it may be born out of like asking for permission to be smart in public, possibly. But I regardless, I do. It's a heavy subject. And with Doña Elvia Cortes Gil's story, it is not my place to make a celebration of her life, right? So in that case, I am very careful. This piece is about my aunt's dad, so I don't think anybody's going to say like this is all happy-go-lucky material. And I that's not true. I've written some things that I would say are funny, almost intentionally sometimes. But I don't believe in any type of binary. Genre, like gender, I think is a useful construct for shelving books and people. But that's about it. So I feel the same way about representing life and existence and memory itself. So I chose the title "Pain Pays the Income of Each Precious Thing" because it isn't that like it was worth it. I think it was worth it. It's a silly thing. I have a limp. I had a pretty bad accident, tore up my ACL, nicked my MCL, the meniscus, the cartilage got torn up. They had to like go in with laser to try to cut everything up so that like I would, have some functionality on my left knee. I would never say that it was worth it for whatever, but it was a thing, and it was an exquisite amount of pain, and it was mine, and I am it. And there is no such thing as time, because trauma is a time machine. So especially with narrative, I try to represent that, right? So my aunt is alive and she is dead, and that's the thing. That's how memory works. So I undercut myself saying like all of these things are sad. I do think I would never say claim a celebration of Doña Elvia Cortes Gil's story, because it is hers and it's her family's to make anything that they want to make. But the public aspect of that story was a pretty intense national trauma that I don't know if we'll ever get over. Because the definition of getting over so frequently is to forget, and that is a thing that I think we should remain unwilling to do. But I'm glad that you see some beauty in it, because pain pays the income of each precious and unprecious thing. So I'm glad that you like it. Brevity was very kind to publish that piece, and if you're not reading Brevity, I think you should. It's a wonderful journal.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. It's a great question. I'm sorry if I mocked you. It is my defense mechanism. Are there any other questions? Anything else that I can answer, or do you have questions about, or inquiries, or? No, I don't have other talents. I would offer up anything else. Yes, Ben, did you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I have a question that's actually Nicole asked earlier in the chat. After Shirley Jackson and H.P. Lovecraft, who was the third author that you mentioned when talking about evil literature?
Oh,
and I just wanted to add on to that question. Like who are some other writers who are in that vein, maybe that you really admire or are excited about, or who?
I have a vast and ample satanic library. The name for the author that I mentioned, Where Were You at Night, is Clarice Lispector. She one of the most important writers of the 20th century, period. If you haven't heard of her, it's because only 3% of literature in the United States is translated literature, and that is a damn shame, because everywhere else in the world, the balance is entirely different. Clarice Lispector was a Ukrainian-Brazilian writer who just revolutionized the way that like words could work on a page. She was also incredibly stylish. There was an article in the New Yorker called "The Glamour of Clarice Lispector." She very similarly to Shirley Jackson, Shirley Jackson was famously said that what she wrote was not science fiction but seance fiction. And in one interview, they said that she did not write with a pen but with a broom. Clarice Lispector, just like Shirley Jackson, embraced it thoroughly, but I don't know if you met any Latin Americans. We take our witchcraft very seriously. So she wrote, and then John Delgado included in his anthology of The Lost Origins of the Essay, maybe? I think so. The Lost Origins of the Essay. He included an essay called The Chicken and the Egg, but I believe in Portuguese is The Hen and the Egg, because gender or something. And she wrote, I teach her as a metaphysical essay. And she read that essay I need to, once the world opens up again and I'm able to travel, I'll be able to fully verify this, but she read that essay about the egg in the first World Witchcraft Conference in Bogota, Colombia, my hometown. There was a poster and it was on eBay, and I thought I'll get home and I'll do that because I'm in the middle of class. I should have stopped class. I should have purchased it. I would have it in my possession now. So Clarice Lispector is she's fantastic. I would say Agua Viva, or her short stories, she wrote narratively. She broke into the world with one collection called Lazos de Familia, the family ties, and then further and further into her career, as she became ill and started experiencing excruciating amounts of pain. Like Shirley Jackson, she died pretty young. Her writing became stranger and stranger and stranger. She spoke multiple languages, and she wrote for Glamour magazine. So imagine if Anna Wintour wrote seance fiction, that's Clarice Lispector. If you haven't read her, you really should. She's just fantastic. Regarding satanic literature, I would say, my partner hates me for this, but go with Dante. You can't go wrong if you go Dante. But if you haven't read The Master and Margarita by Vladimir Bulgakov, you definitely should. It's fun and strange, and there's an 8-foot-tall cat called Behemoth who works as a butler. So again, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but you should do that. The Diary of Satan is a really good, strange story. It's a novel written by a woman, early 19th century, I think, where Satan decides to go on vacation because it's a very hard job, and he makes it a whole week on Earth before somebody robs him, steals from him, beats him up, and leaves him in a corner. And I think it's just great. It's lovely. It was probably very influential in Good Omens, which is also a fun book to read. There's so many books. I have this incredibly long list for my students to write papers on. It's not an obsession if you can get your employers to pay you for it, is what I've been told, or tell myself. No one's told me that. I've decided that that's true. But yeah, if you are in a satanic mood and you just tweet at me and tell me, I want something satanic with this in mind, I guarantee I will tell you a book or short story to read.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. That's a strange question to end on. Does anybody want to ask anything else? Anything at all? What's the weather like in Chicago right now? The answer is I don't know. I don't go outside. No idea.
How long have you been teaching at the University of Chicago?
2 years. Yeah, I started moving when I was 7, and shortly thereafter, there was a little bit of a break while I was going to grad school, but I moved roughly every 2 years. There's a lot of moving for a long time. So I'm hitting my edge in Chicago, and I'm fighting all of my nomad instincts to just pack up and go. Don't tell them that. I'm very
No.
happy here.
Yes.
I'm definitely not going anywhere. But yeah, 2 years, one entirely in lockdown. It's been a trip. I don't need to keep you here if you want to end early, but again.
I don't know if this is any less weird of a question, but I do have another question. And when the emails were sent out for this event, there was a bio that included you had written something called an ode to cannibalism.
Yeah.
And I'm just really interested in hearing what that exactly was. If I understand correctly, you were basing it on essays by, and I have horrible French pronunciation, Montaigne.
Yeah.
And so I was just really intrigued to hear what that process was like, taking a work that already exists and turning it into something new.
Yeah, there are two answers to that question. The answer is if you just say yes, especially in the beginning of your career, just say yes to everything. That's the first answer. And be known as someone who will say yes. So this in this anthology, if I'm not wrong, Maggie Nelson is also featured. Like there's some really big heavy hitters, and I am the most insignificant. Like nobody knows why I ended up in there, but I know how I ended up in there. And the answer is someone dropped out. That's what happened. And I was known as the person who like would do a quick turnaround, always had something strange in the works. And my former undergrad mentor just reached out to me. It was his anthology. He said, what are the chances that you can have something to me in a week? And I said, very good. I dropped everything. I stopped everything I was doing, and I just wrote for a week, and the essay sort of came out. The essay itself, actually, he had told me to write it maybe a year prior to this, because at the time, when I was in Iowa, I put myself through school, and I put my sister partially through school, partially because she was kicked out of her university at some point. So longer story. But I had so many jobs, and one of the jobs is that I dissected placentas for the maternal fetal tissue bank in the University of Iowa, which is, again, a job you get by just saying yes to people. So I was a clerk, and then they're like, do you mind like working in this lab? And I said, no, not a problem. And then they said, you seem to have the ability to not vomit when you're near placenta. And I'm like, I do have that talent. And they're like, would you like to do this? And then that was my job. I just dissected placentas. I walked back and forth from this hospital, picking up placentas in a bucket that structurally and visually struck one as similar to Winnie the Pooh's honey jar. And I was given a lab coat that was several sizes too big for me. And I'm talking like it's an extra large, and I'm 5'2". That's a lie. I'm actually shorter, but that's what I officially say. And it was the middle of summer, so I had shorts and tennis shoes and this giant lab coat, and I was walking around with my honey jar full of blood, and I would just dissect placentas. And the thing to note is that among the many things that I did for money is that I sold all of my blood all the time. I think I also was doing simultaneously a rabies study, so I was injected with the rabies virus, and I would work in the writing center in the morning. I would ride my bike. I would donate my platelets to make rabies vaccines. I would ride my bike to the hospital, and I would dissect placentas for the rest of the afternoon. And then I tutored later on, and I don't know how I did it. But I was, this is the important part, definitely had an iron deficiency. So that's the context for this. The reason I was allowed to dissect placentas is that I was drawn to them. Like the closest I've come to love at first sight was like I saw it and I wanted it. I wanted to drag my tongue across it. And I talked Patrick Madden, who is the most straight-laced writer that you'll ever meet. He has 6 children. He loves life. He loves teaching. He likes thinking about ideas. And I told him this, and he said, "You should do it." I'm like, Patrick, I will die. Like there's a reason we don't eat raw human flesh. He's like, yeah, but like, should you do it? And I didn't, but I really wanted to. Later on, I did con one of my friends to letting me eat her placenta, and as an act of dominance, I ate it. I did it in front of her brand new baby, to show him who was boss. And I wrote about that. That's what the essay is about. not the second part. I couldn't get my hands on a placenta for a while, for a couple of years after I wrote the essay, but it's an ode to the placenta more than cannibalism. It's a phenomenal organ, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. And now you know the whole story of it. Just say yes. People say, like, can you give me an essay in a week? You just say yes. Did that answer any question, Josh?
Yeah, thank you. I'm totally sold on reading
You're
that
welcome.
essay. So
What did it taste like?
A liver. The thing about organ meat is that it's not muscle. Like, there is no taste to it. It's just bland. You should, and I didn't season it because I wanted to really know what it tasted like, and just liver. Just tastes like liver. Also, I'm a vegetarian now. Unrelated. Is that better? Is that everybody in a better mood? Coincidentally, I bragged about this earlier, but reading that piece was that I made someone vomit, and then I became that person's thesis advisor. Don't ask me how that worked out, but true story. I have not met you, Ria, but I really like that you're enjoying whatever's happening right now. No, that's fine. You're all good.
Losing my shit over here. It's fine.
I'm really glad. Are there any final questions? Anyone else want to know what it's like to have rabies, or anything related to this? Otherwise,
Well, now that you mention it, I feel
Yes.
like you need to tell us what it's like to have rabies.
So a very good question, Ben. The answer is I don't know, because I was allergic to the preservative in the vaccine. So I don't know if having rabies means that you faint once a week, but that's what it was like for me. I just fainted a lot. And my only advice to you is, if you think that you're going to faint, find hills, because the fall is shorter. You just fall forward, and then you just keep going from that point on. So I was sick for like 3 months, but they paid really well. It was like $70 a week for just bleeding, and I was really good at bleeding. Extra hydration. Nutty Nuggets, which are the Walmart's brand for grape nuts, have 250% of your daily allotment for iron, so they'll never turn you away. As long as you have enough vitamin C, you will assimilate it. So for a while, that was my diet. It was just Nutty Nuggets, and I soaked them in orange juice, which just does not taste good, but you will not have an iron deficiency. So I don't know. What I do know is that you should definitely get vaccinated, because someone is suffering so that you can have that vaccine. It will kill you, but mostly there are people donating blood today so that you can have a rabies vaccine, and the least you can do is use it. So I feel like very little has been learned about writing, but I also feel very good about the advice I have provided. I hope this makes Jenny look good, but also not so much. So I hope that's worked out for my. I'm kidding, Greg. Jenny's fantastic, and I'm really glad that I got the chance to talk to all of you. I do miss MFA students because they ask the best questions, and I thank you once more. I'm also gonna go because I am very tired. And you can find me online if anybody has other questions. Otherwise, thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you. This was really great. I mean, I've never seen such a juxtaposition between such dark material and such hilarious commentary in between. It's great.
Yeah, I've lived a life.
The highs and the lows.
Yeah, I should write the funny stuff too, is what my father tells me. But then how do I shock people when I tell them that I have participated in cannibalism? There's just not so many of us. Okay, with that, thank you everybody, and I'm on my way.
Thank you.
Sleep well.
Good night.